What if you were called a fraud inside a building you own? Vanessa Clark walked into her own bank and was nearly arrested because of how she looked. But she didn't raise her voice. She stood tall, revealed the truth, and dismantled a system of quiet discrimination in real time. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's a lesson in leadership, integrity, and the power of speaking clearly when silence becomes harm. Stay until the end. What happens inside this bank will change how you see power forever. You need to leave. This lounge is for real customers. Lisa Newman didn't blink. Her voice sliced through the quiet like a slap across the face. At exactly 10:17 a.m. on a humid Miami morning, in the air-conditioned hush of Summit Wealth Bank's private guest lounge, where marble gleamed and money whispered, those 8 words landed on Vanessa Clark like a dagger. Not because they surprised her, but because she had expected them. Before we go any further, let me ask you this. Have you ever been dismissed from a place, not knowing that you own the very building they're standing in? If that question makes your heart race, stick with this story. In just 10 minutes, everything you think you know about power, prejudice, and the polished world of high finance will be turned inside out. Vanessa Clark, age 46, walked into the branch that morning wearing dark jeans, a soft blue cashmere sweater, and black loafers. Plain, classic, unbranded. There was no designer bag, no gold watch, no assistant trailing behind her. Only a slim leather tablet case and the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Not today. Because today was a test. 2 years ago, Vanessa acquired Summit Wealth Bank through Summit Enterprises, the global conglomerate she built from the ground up. A multi-billion-dollar force with stakes in energy, tech, and real estate. And yet, here she was, alone, unannounced, anonymous, by design. She approached the front desk and asked politely to use the private lounge to withdraw $5 million. The teller, without hesitation, waved her through the glass doors into the exclusive suite. But that calm dissolved the moment she sat down. Lisa Newman, 43, the branch manager, swept into the room like she was chasing smoke. Her crisp blouse and sharp heels clicked with purpose. Leaning over the polished mahogany table, she narrowed her eyes. "We need to verify the source of your funds," she said coolly. Vanessa didn't react. She had seen this look before. At 23, when her account was frozen after depositing her first real estate commission. At 26, when a loan officer labeled her high risk despite bringing in 30% more collateral than required. And now, 2 decades and $8 billion later, that same suspicion returned, dressed in a blazer and a badge. She calmly opened her tablet, scrolled to a document, and slid it across the table. But before Lisa could even glance at it, "Don't block the aisle, sweetheart," a voice cut in. Edward Pierce, 45, sauntered past in a gray tailored suit that cost more than most people's mortgage. A senior investment banker, white, smug. With a flick of his wrist, he knocked Vanessa's tablet to the floor. It hit the marble with a soft thud. He didn't look back. Vanessa did not move. Her gaze followed him, cool, unflinching. In the corner of the room, Natalie Wells, 29, arms folded, spoke with venom disguised as volume. "That amount of money is suspicious. She could have stolen it." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. 2 guests nearby looked up. One raised an eyebrow, another leaned closer to whisper. Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief moment, then said steadily, "Run my name." Lisa shook her head. "You're not verified. This isn't a shopping mall." At the back of the room, Keith Morris, a 31-year-old tech entrepreneur, pulled out his phone. The red recording light glowed like an alarm in the silence. "Don't," Vanessa said firmly, voice still calm. "We don't solve this with footage, we solve it with facts." Calvin Holt, 40, a tall black man in a charcoal suit, rose from his chair and approached Keith. "Brother," he said softly, "put it down. This isn't just about catching a moment. It's about changing the whole conversation." Keith hesitated. Vanessa met his eyes. "Use your words." Silence settled. Maya Reed, 28, sitting beside Vanessa, clenched her fists around her purse. Her lips tightened in fury. She whispered, "This is messed up." Vanessa turned. "Say it," she encouraged gently. "Let them hear you." Maya stood up. Her voice trembled at first but rose with each word. "She's not the problem," Maya said, pointing directly at Lisa, then Natalie. "They are." Natalie raised her brows, unimpressed. "Security is monitoring," she muttered. And from behind them Edward chuckled, leaning against a marble pillar like it was a bar stool. "You people really think she has $5 million in this account?" he scoffed. "Try the pawn shop down the street." Then he dropped a folded paper. It fluttered to the ground and landed at Vanessa's feet. Maya stooped down, picked it up, and read the scribbled note aloud. "Go to a pawn shop." A collective gasp echoed through the marble chamber. And for the first time that morning, the weight of silence began shifting. An older white woman gripped her handbag tighter. Across the room, a young Latino father holding his toddler looked up from his phone, sensing the tension like smoke in the air. The room wasn't silent anymore. It was buzzing, low whispers, darting eyes, the slow churn of judgment forming in real time. "Enough," Vanessa said. Her voice, clear and steady, sliced through the noise, not angry, not loud, but full of something deeper. Command. "You're dismantling this institution with every word you speak." Lisa Newman only smiled, a smug, tight smirk that said she enjoyed the control too much to notice its fragility. "You're not a client," Lisa sneered. "You're a fraud. Go play millionaire somewhere else." Vanessa inhaled slowly. No sudden movement. She took out her phone and made a single call. "Carla," she said, "initiate Protocol 6. On the other end, Carla Evans, her executive assistant, didn't hesitate. "Ready, ma'am," came the calm reply. Vanessa's eyes never left Lisa. "You'll regret this," she said. Not in anger, not in threat, but in truth. "Not because I'll scream, not because I'll post a video, but because today you wrongly told the woman who owns this bank that she didn't belong here." Lisa let out a disbelieving laugh. "I'm not afraid of delusions." Keith raised his phone again. Calvin stepped forward before the red light could flicker back on. "We do this the right way," he said, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "No editing, no viral clips. We speak the truth." Edward Pierce rolled his eyes. "Call security," he snapped. Lisa nodded at Natalie, who had already unlocked her phone. "Do it now. She's a fraud." Vanessa remained unmoved, her posture serene as stone, the same stillness she had once held when a property deal nearly collapsed due to forged documents. The same stillness that had carried her through 14 major acquisitions, 2 recessions, and countless boardroom betrayals. But today it wasn't just her name on the line. It was her presence. Her right to exist in this space, this room, this world she helped build. So before we dive further, I'll ask you one thing. If someone tried to erase you from a place you created, would you walk out quietly? Or would you do what Vanessa did, stay seated, let the storm come and make them face it? Because the storm was already here. "She's a scammer, Robert, get her out!" Lisa shouted now, no longer feigning politeness. Her voice boomed across the lounge, desperate, defensive, unhinged. She tried to drown the truth with volume. Robert Clanny, assistant branch director, age 48, walked forward slowly. His shoulders were tight, his steps reluctant. "This woman," Lisa bellowed, pointing as if accusing a criminal, "is parading around like she owns this place." Vanessa turned her head, slowly, without blinking. The marble floor beneath them gleamed. Frosted glass panels caught the overhead lights, but none of it softened the growing heat of humiliation that clung to every surface. The lounge no longer felt private. It felt like a courtroom, and judgment had arrived early. Edward straightened his suit jacket, jaw tight. "She stole that money," he barked, "and now she's wasting everyone's time. Why hasn't she been arrested?" The word "stole" cracked through the air like a gunshot. 2 customers near the espresso bar stiffened. One reached for his phone, then hesitated, unsure. Natalie, still leaning against the wall, crossed her arms tighter, her eyes narrowed with certainty. "That's stolen money," she said firmly. "No real client makes that kind of request, and no one dresses like that if they're legit." Vanessa heard it all. The faded jeans, the simple sweater, the well-worn loafers, her quiet uniform of power, unadorned, unbranded, intentional. Not armor, not camouflage, just truth. And somehow that made her invisible. Maya Reed stood up suddenly, her voice shaking but resolute. "Enough," she said, loud enough for every corner of the room to hear. "This is wrong. She's not the one out of place here. You are." Edward scoffed. "We know her kind. Probably got someone's login and thought she could waltz in and pull $500,000 like it's her birthday." Robert shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. His lips parted, perhaps to intervene, but nothing came out. Keith, still holding his phone at waist level, whispered, "I should have recorded this." Vanessa shook her head slowly. "Words," she said, "not lenses." Calvin stepped forward again, standing beside her like a silent shield. "Let her voice carry," he said to Keith, "not her camera. If we want to change the room, we speak inside it, not post outside of it." Keith froze. The room, once so polished and poised, was now a boiling vessel of truth, power, and shame colliding in real time. And Vanessa Clark, still seated, still silent, remained the eye of that storm. Maya looked around the room, her chest rising and falling with quiet fury. "She was right," she whispered. "But this doesn't even feel real." Around her, disbelief and discomfort hung thick. "That's how they treat us," Maya added, "like we don't belong." Natalie took a breath, trying to mask the tension. "She's making a scene," she muttered. But before the sentence could settle, Vanessa's voice cut through like cold steel. "She called security to arrest me, because I existed. It wasn't volume, it was weight. A declaration, a fact." Robert finally found his voice. Soft. Hesitant. Eyes on the floor. Do you have any account verification?" The question wasn't cruel. It sounded like shame. Vanessa didn't turn to him. Instead, she calmly raised her phone. "Carla," she said, "they've escalated. Begin Phase 2 of Protocol 6. On the other end, Carla Evans replied smoothly, without pause. "Confirmed. Escalation documented. All phrases flagged and time-stamped. Lisa's call to security is recorded. We'll forward this directly to internal audit." "They'll hear everything," Vanessa replied, still facing ahead, word for word. Robert straightened slightly, caught between two forces, the manager he reported to, and the truth unraveling around him. Lisa waved her hand dismissively. "Don't listen to this," she scoffed. "She's just here for drama." Edward chimed in with his usual smugness. "Probably filming some sob story for social media. Victim culture gets clicks." Keith stepped forward, no phone in hand now, just honesty. "She's not filming," he said. "I was. I stopped when she asked us to speak, not record. Maybe we should try listening instead." Natalie crossed her arms tighter, frustration curling her voice. "Security's coming. They'll deal with it." Maya didn't sit. "What exactly is security for?" she asked. "To remove people who make you uncomfortable?" Lisa snapped. "You're all being manipulated. Wake up. No one just walks in here and pulls out $500,000. She's nothing." Vanessa turned toward her, fully, finally. "Patient sound?" she said. "That's not fear. That's the sound of your control slipping." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "Is that a threat?" Vanessa didn't blink. "Now just a mirror." Carla's voice returned through the phone. "Vanessa, the Corporate Ethics Board has been alerted. They're watching live. All biased language from the last 3 minutes has been recorded. Also, I've linked the 2023 acquisition records to your profile for live verification." Vanessa nodded. "Keep the line open." Lisa laughed bitterly. "Your little tech tricks won't save your scam." Robert finally turned toward her, something cracking in his voice. "But what if she's telling the truth?" Lisa stared at him like he'd grown horns. "Don't be naive." But the cracks had started. Vanessa stood up, steady, poised, unafraid. You asked for proof of funds. You accused me of fraud. You called me a thief. You summoned security. You mocked my clothes. You humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers. Her voice never rose. It didn't have to be this way, but I'm still standing here. So ask yourself, why do you think that is? Silence fell, thick, cold, immediate. Even Edward pressed his lips together, arms crossed, suddenly unsure. Maya walked up to Vanessa and whispered, "What now?" Vanessa replied, soft but certain, "We wait. Truth always arrives whether they want it or not." Lisa folded her arms tightly, a sneer twisting her mouth. "You're lying." "I don't have anything," Edward snapped. "If she's rich, prove it. Flash the bank statements. Show off. Like you all do until someone asks for a PIN code." Calvin turned around slowly. "Gentlemen," he said. His voice echoed. Robert sat down heavily on one of the benches. The words had broken him. "This isn't how people should be treated." Natalie rolled her eyes. "This is protocol." Vanessa spoke into her phone again. "Carla, has Phase 3 started?" "In progress," Carla replied. "Just a note, Lisa's compliance reviews are being pulled. She has 8 prior complaints involving women of color. None were ever escalated, all unresolved. This doesn't look good." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. She had known, but hearing it so clearly, so publicly, still carried weight. "Thank you, Carla," she said. "And stop." Maya's voice wavered with emotion. "They're trying to erase us, with policy, with tone, with fake concern for security." Vanessa placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Not today." Lisa's smirk returned, brittle. "You think a phone call and a few corporate buzzwords change anything?" Vanessa's gaze sharpened. "It could cut glass." "I'm not here to change anything." She paused. "Here to end it." Keith exhaled. "Damn," he muttered. Calvin nodded slowly. "And that's why we don't film." He looked around the room. "When people speak truth like this, you don't need a filter." Without warning, Natalie walked toward Vanessa. Her heels struck the floor like a countdown. She reached down and picked up the tablet that had fallen earlier. For a moment, she stood with it in her hands, staring down. Then, without a word, she tossed it aside. The tablet skidded across the floor and struck the leg of a leather chair with a dull thud. "Trash," Natalie muttered under her breath. "Stolen?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed, not out of rage, but clarity. "Is that something you truly believe needs to be destroyed?" she asked quietly. "Or was that just your reflex, to control?" Natalie didn't answer. She turned her back and walked away. Robert watched her go. He shook his head. "She's gone too far." And at that moment Vanessa spoke again. "Every second you spend talking," she said, "instead of reflecting, is 1 second closer to the end of your job." Lisa's smirk finally faltered. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Vanessa's voice turned sharper, measured, cutting. "No, I'm your reckoning." Lisa's lips parted, but before she could respond, Vanessa added, "Go ahead, call the police, call anyone you want, but remember, what you're really afraid of is not me. It's what I represent." Natalie didn't hesitate. She picked up the landline. She wanted the whole room to hear. "Yes," she said clearly. "We have a woman here attempting to withdraw funds under false pretenses, a large sum, potentially stolen." There was no hesitation in her tone, no stumble. And she'd said it like she'd said it before. Vanessa Clark sat perfectly still in the center of the lounge, arms folded gently over the tablet in her lap, eyes focused forward, calm. But her next words cut deep. "You just filed a false federal report," she said softly. "I hope you're ready to explain that in court." Lisa leaned against the espresso counter like it was a throne, her arms folded, her voice thick with contempt. "Sweetheart, that's not how this works. We protect the institution, not the imposters." Then she turned to Robert, her voice growing harder. "Remove her." No. But Robert didn't move. He looked at Vanessa, then Natalie, then back to Lisa. "She hasn't even said a word," he murmured. And that's what terrifies you, isn't it? Edward stepped forward, trying once more to fill the space with bluster. Is laundering money, it's obvious. What more do you need? He waved a platinum business card in the air like it was holy scripture. I'm supposed to be in a secure consultation. I'm a priority client. His voice cracked at the end, too loud, too eager. It rang false. This woman is nothing. This is all just theatrics. Lisa marched toward Vanessa's chair, eyes burning. Show me your financial records right now, she barked. If you're legit, prove it. Open your account. Right here, in front of everyone. There was no professionalism left in her voice, only mockery. But Vanessa didn't move. She simply turned her head. The sound of footsteps echoed in from the marble hallway. And then he appeared. Tyler Moss, head of security. 34, neatly pressed navy uniform. The Summit Wealth badge sewn tight above his heart. What's going on here? He asked. Natalie pointed directly at Vanessa, her finger trembling slightly. She's suspected of fraud. We've asked for verification. She's refused. And now she's escalating the situation with phone calls. Tyler nodded. He stepped forward with calculated weight. He stopped directly in front of Vanessa. I need your bag and your tablet, he said. It wasn't a request. Vanessa didn't flinch. When she didn't immediately comply, Tyler reached down and knocked her purse off the seat beside her. It fell to the floor with a heavy, humiliating thud. You are now in violation of compliance protocols, he said, and being detained for non-cooperation. Calvin Holt, who had remained rooted in the center of the lounge, stepped forward immediately. That's not legal, he said firmly. She hasn't broken any laws. Across the room, Maya clutched her phone, not to record but to steady herself. Her hands were trembling. This is what happens, she whispered. Even when we sit in silence. Vanessa looked up. Her eyes met Tyler's without fear. Touch me again, she said evenly, and I will personally ensure Summit Wealth pays for it. Tyler raised an eyebrow, amused. Ma'am, he said, condescending, I don't care what you threaten. You don't belong in this place. Those 5 words hit harder than any shove. You don't belong in this place. Calvin stepped forward, placing himself directly between them. Step back, he said, voice low and unwavering. Tyler stiffened. Are you interfering now? I'm protecting a client. The 2 men stood locked, not in violence, but in principle. Keith, in the corner, lifted his phone, this time slowly, deliberately. This, he said. This needs to be seen. Vanessa's voice cracked. Not with fear, but with rage, held back for far too long. Keith, don't, she said, not looking at him. We don't need their eyes. She turned slowly. We need their ears. Keith swallowed, lowered his phone and stepped back. Vanessa faced Lisa, her voice deliberate. You demand my history like I owe you my identity. But I don't owe this room anything. She scanned the faces around her. I make more money than anyone here, including you. So instead of asking where my money comes from, ask yourself, why do you think you have the right to question it? At that moment, Carla's voice came through the phone. Steady, cool, unflinching. Vanessa, Protocol 6 is fully engaged. Compliance has bookmarked Lisa Newman's profile. They're pulling the audit logs from 2023. I've also flagged Edward Pierce's prior warning for verbal misconduct. One more incident and he's officially in breach. Vanessa didn't smile. She didn't flinch. Let it all play out, she said, every piece. Lisa leaned forward, her voice lowered to a growl. You're not getting away with this. Vanessa turned her gaze on her. You mean being black, wealthy, and patient? She let the silence linger. I've been doing that for 20 years. Behind the crowd, Robert shifted uneasily, stepping out from the others. This isn't what I signed up for, he muttered. Natalie clung to the phone, still reporting calmly, still clinging to protocol like a lifeline. Suspected fraud. Financial threat. Repeat the suspect's name clearly. But the room was changing. An older man by the window shook his head. This is ridiculous. A young black couple stood hand in hand, watching with quiet disbelief. And then, finally, the first crack in the wall. Robert's voice broke the silence. Soft, but unshakable. "I need to say something." All heads turned. "Lisa." "Natalie, what we're doing is wrong." Lisa's eyes widened. "Don't you dare." Robert didn't look up. Natalie wanted the police here before she even ran her ID. She didn't verify anything. She said bringing them in would get this over faster. Natalie gasped. "That's a lie." But Robert turned, nodded once. "I was there. You said it, and you both knew exactly who she was." Edward exploded. "You're turning on your team for her. She's lying." And then Vanessa stood, straight-backed, steady, stone-mind. "I believe the term you're reaching for," she said, her voice rising, "is CEO. I'm Vanessa Clark, CEO of Summit Enterprises, owner of Summit Wealth Bank." She swept her gaze across the room. "And every second you spent humiliating me in this lounge has been recorded, archived, and is now witnessed." The room fell completely still. Customers stopped, phones dropped, coffee cups froze mid-air. Lisa's face turned pale. Robert stood silent. Natalie stepped back toward the wall. Tyler blinked as if a ghost had stepped out of the past. And then it hit. The revelation wasn't the shock. It was the realization of how they had acted when they thought she was no one. And then came the sound. A slow clap. One customer, then another, then everyone. Applause swept the room like a wave. Calvin stepped forward, eyes wide with recognition. "I've seen you," he said. "Forbes, 2 years ago. You turned this bank around." Maya had tears streaming down her cheeks. "She's our CEO," Keith whispered, barely audible. "And I should have filmed this part." Vanessa looked around the room, her voice no longer calm. It was commanding. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I was." She let that land. "The problem is how you treat people you think don't matter." Lisa stammered. "You set us up." "No," Vanessa said calmly. "I checked you. And you failed." The room seemed to shake, not from noise, but from truth, from reckoning. Somewhere outside, the faint sound of sirens grew weaker. Justice had already walked through the door. But Lisa, desperate now, pointed a trembling hand at Vanessa. "Arrest her," she shouted, her voice cracking, "before she disappears." Her posture collapsed into something wild, her words erratic. Tyler Moss, head of security, stepped forward. No hesitation this time, not because he was confident, but because he was afraid. He reached for Vanessa's arm, as if dragging her away might somehow erase what had just happened. Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't take a step back. She stood like steel anchored to the floor, her voice low but razor-sharp. "Touch me and you'll lose more than your job." She didn't have to shout. It was the kind of sentence that echoed in the bones. Tyler's hand froze mid-air. But before he could make another move, Maya Reed stepped between them. "Stand back," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Saw what she said. She owns this place." Tyler hesitated, blinking. His gaze bounced from Maya to Lisa, then back to Vanessa. The stiffness in his posture cracked like old paint. The badge on his chest didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. And then the double doors opened. 2 uniformed officers entered. Their boots echoed sharply against the marble floors, slicing the silence in two. The lead officer, a white man in his 40s with tired eyes and a calm demeanor, took in the room. "We received a report of attempted fraud," he said. "Can someone tell us what's happening here?" Natalie Wells stepped forward with too much certainty. Her stance was practiced, her voice quick and clipped. "She is impersonating a high-net-worth client," she said. "Requested a $500,000 cash withdrawal without verification. Possible identity fraud. Could be federal theft." Vanessa didn't blink. She turned toward the officers, eyes clear. "I'll be happy to give a statement," she said. "But not right now." Before anyone could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, quiet but powerful. "They're lying." Heads turned. "Zara Brooks." 24. Black, slight, quiet. Until now. She stood from her seat near the frosted glass, forgotten until now, her denim jacket wrinkled, her voice calm but wounded. They did the same to me. 2 weeks ago, I came to open an account for my photography business. Natalie said no. She paused, then added, word for word, we don't open accounts for freelancers with inconsistent histories. Natalie whipped around, voice sharp. That's not true. Zara lifted her phone. I recorded it, she said. I didn't post it, but maybe now someone should. A hushed wave passed through the room. Tyler stepped back. One of the officers turned to Natalie. Did you report her after you knew she owned this bank? Natalie's complexion faded like a curtain drawn back. She didn't own it at the time. Vanessa turned toward her, slow, deliberate. I've owned it for almost 2 years. She let it hang. Well, either what you just said is a lie, or a confession. Keith picked up his phone again, but this time he didn't record. He whispered, she doesn't need to yell. Doesn't need a camera. She is the camera now. Calvin looked at the officers and said plainly, gentlemen, what you're witnessing is the collapse of a system. A system that's always protected people like Natalie, Lisa, and Edward. And I think you know that too. The lead officer nodded slowly. We're not arresting anyone, but we will be filing a full report. On Vanessa's phone, Carla Evans' voice returned, measured and timed like clockwork. Vanessa, we received Zara Brooks' complaint last month. It was dismissed. Natalie was marked as non-actionable against Policy 4.3. That's a compliance violation. Vanessa's jaw tensed. And Lisa? She signed the rejection, Carla confirmed. Vanessa turned, now fully facing Lisa. You told me to leave. You refused my ID. You called me a scammer. And now you're hiding behind Natalie's broken paper trail. Lisa's hands shook, her voice cracked. She dressed like someone who didn't belong. I made a judgment. Vanessa took a slow step forward. That's not judgment. That's bias. From the sidelines, Edward Pierce rolled his eyes and scoffed. This is getting ridiculous. I'm done. I've got better things to do. Maya turned sharply. No, you're not walking away. You're part of this. Edward snapped. You people are always so loud. The whole room inhaled. You people, Keith repeated. You mean the woman who owns the bank? Calvin stepped in front of Edward. Go ahead, man, walk out. That platinum card you flash won't save you from what just happened. Edward turned to leave, but before he could escape, the officer held up a hand. Sir, we'll need a full statement before you go. Edward froze, then lowered his shoulders and sat down in defeat. Vanessa turned to the officers again. Her voice had cooled, controlled, a leader now in full command. I'd like to request a full internal review, she said. Not just disciplinary, but cultural. Because what happened today wasn't just policy failure. It was moral failure. One of the officers nodded. We'll note that. Vanessa exhaled. And for the first time she allowed herself to sit, not out of defeat, but resolution. Maya stood beside her. Zara came closer. Calvin remained still, a quiet pillar. And Keith, holding his phone, whispered the only words left to say. Things changed the road, without raising her voice. But Vanessa wasn't finished. Not yet. She turned to the officers and the room, her voice steady but firm. I want everyone to speak up. Not just for me, but so this room never forgets what just happened. One of the officers nodded. You sure? I'm sure, Vanessa said. Then she turned to Zara, the young woman in the denim jacket. You were brave, she said. I'm proud of you. Zara shook her head gently. I shouldn't have to be brave just to open a bank account. I just wanted to be treated fairly. Vanessa placed a hand over her own heart. And from this day forward, you will be... In fact, Summit's executive board will personally open your business account at no cost. You've already earned more than most ever will. Calvin turned toward Vanessa, his voice full of warmth and weight. "You didn't just stop a system," he said. "You exposed it." Vanessa looked at him, her voice lowered, dangerously calm. "And now I'll dismantle it." Behind them, Lisa stood stiffly, mumbling to herself, her eyes glassy, her voice thin. This was never supposed to happen. Robert stood beside her, quiet but no longer defensive. "This happens all the time," he murmured. "We just didn't think we'd get caught." Tyler turned toward the exit, as if retreat could erase his role. Vanessa raised her hand. "Stop!" Tyler froze. "You'll want to stay for what happens next. Your name is on the record, too." Maya leaned in to Keith and whispered, "She didn't just fire them. He's rewriting the rules." Carla's voice rang through the still-connected phone. "Summit compliance officers will arrive in 10 minutes. They've asked Vanessa to lead the internal session. They've granted her full authority to act." Vanessa gave the smallest smile, controlled, certain. "Because I've been ready for this day far longer than they know." Around her, the air had shifted. No longer just a lounge. Now it was a tribunal, a turning point, a reckoning. Customers, employees, staff, a quiet young woman named Zara. They weren't just watching. They were witnesses. The future of Summit Wealth was no longer a matter of policy, but it was now personal. "Enough," Vanessa said. She didn't raise her voice. But the room went silent anyway. Where there had once been buzzing tension and veiled skepticism, now there was stillness, attention, reverence. She stepped forward, no more sitting, no more silence. She wore no badge, no CEO sash, no spotlight, but her presence filled the entire room like gravity. "For 10 minutes, she began, "I stood here and endured dismissal, suspicion, and insult, all inside a building that bears my company's name." She reached into her tablet case and pulled out a thin black folder marked with Summit Wealth's golden logo. She opened it and handed it first to the officer, then held it up for all to see. Inside was her company ID, a notarized ownership certificate, a board-certified letter of authorization. "My name is Vanessa Clark," she said. "I am the founder and CEO of Summit Enterprises. Own 81% of Summit Wealth Bank. And starting today, I will no longer tolerate misconduct under this roof." The reaction was electric. Lisa gasped aloud. Robert stepped back, pale. Natalie collapsed into a chair. Tyler's hand fell from his belt, empty. Even Edward, seated and distant, leaned forward like someone waking up from a dream. Carla's voice came back on the call. "Per Compliance Directive 4B, Vanessa Clark is authorized to terminate employment at her sole discretion. This conversation is being recorded and preserved for documentation. You may proceed, ma'am." Vanessa didn't hesitate. She turned toward the center of the room, toward the people who had defined this moment, for better or worse. "Lisa Newman," she said, "you're terminated, effective immediately, on racist behavior, abuse of authority, and obstruction of customer service." Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came. The woman who barked commands just minutes ago now stood mute, small and shivering in place. "Robert Clean," Vanessa continued, "you're terminated, not just for complicity but for silence. You stood by while a customer was degraded, accused, and humiliated, and you said nothing." Robert didn't argue. He simply lowered his head. "Natalie Wells," she said, voice sharper now, "you're terminated for falsifying risk reports, for triggering a false police call, and for suppressing racial bias complaints. You didn't just break the system," she said. "You were the system." Natalie exhaled. Her composure collapsed entirely. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know it was you." Vanessa didn't move. Her response was cool and cutting. "And if it had been someone else?" Natalie's lips parted, but no defense came, no excuse. Vanessa turned to the room. "Tyler Moss," she called out, "return." He stopped in his tracks. "You're fired for aggression, unlawful detainment attempt, and failure to de-escalate." Tyler straightened his back, but he didn't argue. He just turned and walked toward the end of the room like a man waiting for a bus he knew would drive him off a cliff. "And Edward Pierce," Vanessa said, her voice colder than marble, "you are permanently banned from every institution affiliated with Summit, effective immediately. For harassment, for racism, for misconduct, documented and recorded." Edward bolted up. "You can't ban me. I bring more value to this bank than half the people here." Maya didn't hesitate. "Not today." "You don't." Vanessa raised her hand. "We don't build institutions to feed egos. We build them to protect the quiet dignity of those who walk in expecting fairness." And with that the room erupted. But this time it wasn't chaos. It was applause. Not the polite kind, not the performative kind, but the kind that thunders with relief, vindication, and years of pent-up injustice cracking open into light. Calvin stood and nodded slowly. "That's justice, in real time." Zara, still to the side, wiped tears from her cheeks. "I thought I'd never be seen." "Not really." Vanessa met her eyes. Her voice softened. "You're not just seen. You're trusted." As the officers began to turn and leave, Natalie's voice suddenly broke the calm. "Wait," she choked. "I need to say something." Vanessa turned to her, expression unchanged. "Say it." Natalie trembled as she stood, her words halting but raw. "I buried 8 complaints, all from women of color. Viable or outside policy scope. I did it to keep our numbers clean. Robert knew. He told me to do what I had to." Gasps swept through the room. Robert stared at the floor. Vanessa turned to her phone. "Carla, can you confirm?" Carla's voice came sharp and clear. "Confirmed. We've retrieved the complaints and audio files." Natalie's voice appears in 2. Robert's signature appears in 4. Natalie sank into her seat, shivering. "I didn't know how to stop," she whispered. "I thought if I didn't follow, I'd be next." Vanessa walked toward her, calm, unforgiving. "You weren't following. You were carrying the torch while others burned. But today that fire ends." Natalie didn't respond. She cried quietly into her hands. Vanessa turned back to the room, now filled with staff, guests, customers, and witnesses. "For everyone still standing in this room," she said, "employees, clients, officers, guests, I want you to understand something. Ownership isn't a title or a certificate. It's a responsibility. And my responsibility is this. This must never happen again. Not here. Not on my watch." Carla's voice came back once more, calm and powerful. "The company has initiated a full disciplinary review and operational audit of the branch. Vanessa has been authorized to lead reform." Vanessa looked around, at Calvin, at Maya, at Zara, at Keith, at the crowd who once watched in silence, now awake. "Then let's begin," she said. "Because this bank no longer answers to people like Lisa. It answers to the people it was meant to serve." And with those final words, the door to reform didn't just creak open. It swung wide, for dignity to walk through. Vanessa didn't wait for the applause. She stepped into the center of the lounge, the very space where the harm had taken place. "This is not just about what they did," she said. "The question now is, what are we going to do?" She stood beside the cream-colored leather chair, the one that once represented status, now just furniture. "Effective immediately," she said, "all branch operations are suspended. No new transactions, no account activity, no client meetings, until we rebuild what this organization stands for." There were no complaints. Only nods. A few claps. Silent approval. "We implement the Summit Equity Program today. At next quarter." Vanessa took a breath. Deep, grounded. "And we're doing it right here," she said. "In this room. This branch will be the first testing site for verbal accountability audits, diversity reflection protocols, and direct value declarations required of every employee who wants to keep working here." From her tablet, Carla's voice rang clearly over the lounge speakers. "I've prepared the documents. Internal ethics officers are en route and will arrive within the hour. The company has signed. Maya raised her hand slowly, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with fragile hope. What's a verbal audit? Vanessa turned toward her, her expression softened. It means we don't just measure numbers, she said. We track words. What's said, what's ignored. And who's treated like a threat just for walking through the door. Calvin nodded slowly. That changes everything. Keith whispered. That makes it human. Vanessa allowed herself a faint smile. That's the point. And then? Something no one expected. Tyler Moss, the recently fired head of security, cleared his throat. Everyone turned. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. I need to say something, he began. His hands hung loosely at his sides. Hiding just failed to stop what happened here. I helped plan it. The room stilled. Air sucked from the walls. Vanessa's gaze sharpened, but she let him speak. 2 months ago, Natalie came to me. She said corporate was monitoring non-compliance reports and Lisa had a plan to filter anything that looked risky. My job, he said, voice cracking, was to make sure that anyone who raised a concern was flagged and pushed out quietly before it made it to paper. Silence spread like ink on marble. She told me the less we see, the less we write. So I followed. I marked customers as high risk based on how they dressed, the way they questioned fees, or simply because they complained. Maya's voice turned cold. That's not security. That's profiling. Tyler nodded slowly. That's what I knew. And I did it anyway. He turned to Vanessa. You gave me a job. I turned it into a shield. For the wrong people. Vanessa walked forward, quiet, composed. Did Robert know? She asked. I knew enough to never ask, Tyler said. And he always knew which customers to avoid. Carla's voice came through again, decisive and steady. Vanessa, we found 3 altered compliance files. Tyler's name appears on all of them. Tyler didn't deny it. I deserve consequences, he said, but I'm not speaking to protect myself. I'm speaking because for the first time I saw a leader I respected. Vanessa didn't blink. You nearly got me arrested. You reinforced harm. You stood by while others were dehumanized. And now you want forgiveness? Tyler shook his head. No, I want the consequences. But I also want you to know, Natalie didn't act alone. There's a tab in the CRM system, he said, used to mark problem customers. Here, it's long. Carla's voice cut in again. I'm accessing it now. Praising logins. Starting forensic audit. Vanessa turned to the entire room. This is why we reform. Judge tomorrow. Not when it's quiet again. Right here, in the very room where silence became permission for prejudice. Today we tore the roots out. Customers began to applaud again. But this time it wasn't for closure. It was for beginning. Maya stepped beside Vanessa. Let us help, she said. Vanessa nodded. We'll do it together. Starting with the truth. And slowly the room began to transform. Where silence once reigned, voices rose. Where harm once lingered, clarity came in like sunlight. Vanessa stood tall, not in victory, but in resolve. She looked across the space, no longer just a waiting area. Now a front line. Employees who had been terminated were escorted away. Customers lingered, not to spectate, but to stand with. Compliance officers arrived, already reviewing red-flagged reports. An employee handed Vanessa a printed page. These are the interim action items, he said, approved by the board. Vanessa scanned the document, read it quietly. Then she nodded. We start here. Vanessa's voice was steady, calm. But every word she spoke now carried the weight of permanence. She turned to the room. Effective immediately, Summit Wealth will implement verbal behavioral audits across all high-net-worth affiliates. No more hiding bias behind politeness. No more masking discrimination as professionalism. Every branch will follow our lead. Starting right here in Miami. From the tablet, Carla's voice cut in without missing a beat. The compliance division has also terminated Edward Pierce's accounts. His investment firm is now under formal review for internal bias violations. Vanessa glanced at the empty chair where Edward once sat. So smug, so untouchable. Ben was powerful, she said, softly, but never principled. Maya stepped closer, her voice firm. Do what now? What happens after today? Vanessa turned to her. We build something that doesn't just respond to injustice. We build something that prevents it. That's the legacy I want to leave. Keith, still reeling from everything, added in awe. You didn't just fire a team. You exposed a mindset. Vanessa gave him a tired, knowing smile. Then we'll keep exposing it. Until it has nowhere left to hide. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the back of the room, gravelly, measured. Oh, there's one more thing. Everyone turned. A white man in a pressed gray suit stood near the far wall, a Summit Wealth badge pinned to his lapel. My name is Richard Langford, he said. Retired from the banking industry 10 years ago. I used to oversee training in this region. His voice trembled. I trained Lisa, I trained Robert and Natalie when she first joined. And I have something to confess. The room stilled. We taught them to value appearance, not overtly, not with the language of race or class, but with phrases like customer quality, presentation standard, and suitability score. We didn't say to exclude people like you, but we designed a system where the exclusion would still happen. Gasps swept through the lounge. Richard stepped forward. I watched today's events with shame, and I want to say clearly, this didn't start with Lisa. It started with me. And I want to help dismantle it. Vanessa walked toward him. Well now, she asked. Richard swallowed hard. Because when I saw you dismantle this entire machine with nothing but your voice, I realized I'd had one all this time, and I never used it. Vanessa nodded. Then use it now. He turned to the compliance officers. I want to provide full testimony and join the reform committee. An officer stepped forward and guided him away respectfully. It was a heavy moment, but it was honest. Then Carla's voice returned. Vanessa, we've completed the review of the flagged client list. 17 individuals were marked as security risks. 15 of them were Black or Hispanic. None had prior incidents. The list has been forwarded to internal audit and external review. Vanessa closed her eyes. He took a breath. So it's official, she said quietly. This wasn't an incident. It was a culture. Maya reached out and touched her arm. You didn't just push against it, she said. You shattered it. Zara stepped forward, clutching her phone. I came here to start a business. And somehow, you gave me a future. Vanessa turned to her with a small, warm smile. You still will. Only now, you'll do it in a bank that actually sees you. Then Vanessa turned once more, her gaze sweeping the walls that once housed Prejudice, the faces now lit by understanding. And she spoke to all of them, to the ones watching inside the room, and to the world beyond it. In a world where cameras are always watching, let this be the last time silence speaks louder than truth. Let this be the moment we remember that justice doesn't come from hashtags. It comes from what we choose when no one is filming. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I stood still. And I spoke clearly. If I can do that here, then you can do it wherever you are. And as Vanessa turned to lead the compliance team into the inner offices, Carla's voice played one final message through the speakers. The wealth of Summit will never be the same again. And that's exactly the point. The door closed behind her with quiet finality. But the message, the lesson, the legacy, they stayed behind. Right there, in the waiting room, where silence was finally broken forever. And as the door closed behind Vanessa Clark, what remained wasn't just policy change or public accountability. It was the quiet echo of a moral recalibration. What we had just witnessed was not a takedown, it was a resurrection. a resurrection of principle, of truth, and of the invisible dignity so often lost in polished spaces like that private bank lounge. This wasn't just corporate reform. It was personal clarity. It was a moment when the old machinery of deference and silence broke down and something profoundly human stepped in to take its place. What makes this story resonate long after the final word is spoken is that Vanessa Clark never raised her voice. She never once needed to assert dominance through force. Her authority didn't come from spectacle, but from stillness, from restraint, from being a woman who understood the weight of her words and wielded them like truth-tipped arrows. In a world addicted to virality and instant reactions, hers was a victory built on deliberation. But the deeper takeaway is this: the villains in this story weren't monsters, they were ordinary people. And that's the most chilling part of all. Lisa, Natalie, Robert, Tyler, each of them upheld a system of exclusion not by screaming hatred, but by upholding the comfort of quiet bias, by assigning suitability scores, brushing off complaints as inconsistent, or simply refusing to look people in the eye when humanity was needed most. They weren't cartoonish, they were real. And that's what gave this story its impact. The evil wasn't theatrical, it was institutional. And yet, it was exposed not by violence or vengeance, but by clarity, courage, and calm. What Vanessa did wasn't just hold the room accountable. She taught it how to listen. She showed us how to dismantle prejudice not with rage, but with reform. Not by burning the building down, but by opening its doors to air and light. Zara's voice, Maya's tears, Richard's confession. Each of them served as brushstrokes in a larger painting, a portrait of a society learning to face its own reflection. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. Real justice doesn't begin with indictments or handcuffs. It begins when people stop justifying the systems that harm others simply because they were trained not to notice. The final moments. When Vanessa reminded the room that dignity doesn't need an audience to be valid. Offer a timeless truth. We are not defined by what we do when the cameras are on, but by what we choose when no one is watching. Morality isn't an announcement, it's a habit. It's how we treat people we think we'll never need. It's how we hold power when no one is around to see it. In the end, Vanessa Clark is not just a name on a shareholders list. She is a reminder that real change begins when someone refuses to flinch in the face of quiet injustice, and instead decides to speak clearly, because sometimes the most revolutionary thing a person can do is simply stand and speak.